for all of us. It's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. Today on the show, I've got Lana Buchanan. She's the VP of Marketing for Beyond Beer at Anheuser-Busch. With her time at Anheuser-Busch, Lana has overseen the launch of Social Club Hard Seltzer and launched hashtag Together Women Rise program as part of Bon Viv's partnership with Priyanka Chopra Jonas, which became the #1 influencer partnership at Anheuser-Busch. Prior to AB, Lana managed the European portfolio for Campari America, including Aperol, Campari, and Grand Marnier. And prior to that, she worked at Bacardi USA and Diageo in Eastern Europe. On the show today, we talk about, frankly, the quite large portfolio of products that she has, ranging from spirits to non-alcoholic beverages, how she manages a portfolio like that, and the types of marketing that's working given the changing dynamics of the world with this global pandemic that we're all wrestling with. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Lana Buchanan. Lana, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I know you've got a new dog, a new puppy, if you will. How's the puppy doing?
He's doing good. So yes, I am one of those people who bought a puppy during this kind of year. He's 5 months old, and he is now at the point of learning how to bark, which makes all of my Zoom calls even more exciting. So if that does happen today, I really apologize.
Yeah, well, I think we've got a lot of dog lovers that are listeners. So I'm sure they'll forgive us if we get a dog barking there once in a while.
Well, thank you.
So the other interesting thing we were talking about the other day is that you are trained to make all these like classic cocktails, which I kind of am envious because I know how to make a few. But where did you learn how to do all that?
Yeah, I would call it, a survival mechanism at this point. So when I was working at my previous company, which is Campari, you do sales visits, you go out to markets, you get to know the local restaurants, the local stores. And I was out with my former coworker in Northern Florida. I shall not go any more detail on that, just in case he ever listens to this. But he had promised to introduce me to a local bar owner just as a learn about the business. I walk in there, and he had actually set up a cocktail demonstration with one of our brands. So imagine walking in, and there's like 40 staff members that they had brought in just for this training. And it's me. I'm not some famous bartender who knows how to do things. I'm a marketer. So I am standing there behind the bar. All of these teammates are sitting there with like notes ready to go, ready to taste. There's no ingredients. There's no like guidances of what I'm supposed to do. So you see kind of frantically like grabbing a shaker and grabbing some ice and trying to figure it out. All the while, my sales colleague is standing there at the side with the bar owner, basically heckling me. So after that, I walked out of there. I had a good drink, which I made him buy me. But then after that, I kind of realized that I was never going to have that happen to me again. So I went and ensured that I learned the basics of classic cocktails. So all I can say, it was a necessary experience.
There's so many expletives that I would like to scream at the microphone. I mean, like, that's a horrible experience. Was it a typical thing?
I would not say it was typical. It was definitely like a little bit of a horror story that we passed around the office. And then any marketer who went to Northern Florida kind of prepped in their head before they did it. But, in the end of the day, I always look back at it and laugh, which I think is the best way to think of an experience. And if that's what drove me to understand how to make classic cocktails, then you know what? I'm pretty happy.
I love it. Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. And I know you're currently at Anheuser-Busch. So I want to hear a little bit about like what you were doing before. We talked about, you just highlighted your experience at Campari, what your role is now, and what's the scope of responsibilities you have.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I've always in my career been in consumer facing products. So mainly in the spirits category. I started my career at Pernod Ricard, jumped over to Diageo, and then actually those were both in Eastern Europe. And then I came over to the US, worked at Bacardi, and then for the last 5 years previously was at Campari Group, managing some really fun brands, including Aperol, Campari, the namesake, and Grand Marnier. Currently, I'm the VP of Beyond Beer at Anheuser-Busch, which per the title, is basically anything beyond beer. So from non-alc to spirits to wine to flavored malt beverages and spiked seltzers, which everyone knows, that's kind of in my purview for now. And I love that because with every different category, I get to think differently in terms of the consumer.
Got it. I mean, you've got this huge portfolio, like all those things you just listed off. I mean, they're all different categories or subcategories within categories. Like how do you approach even thinking about or managing that portfolio? And
Yeah, and you're right. It's a lot of categories. I think at the end of the day, it's about the consumer and consumer first. So in all of these categories, we know what's happening in terms of what consumers want. And what we look and say is, okay, as a company, what are our priorities within each of it? So for instance, in spirits, our core focus right now is ready to drink cocktails, which is like exploding this year. And we have a brand called Cutwater that's on the forefront of that. So for me in that segment, it's like thinking about the consumer. What are they looking for in the moment that they choose like a canned cocktail versus buying the 3 bottle ingredients to make that drink? And then I get to flip over and say, okay, well, what's the solution in non-alc right now? And our focus there is more around the energy segment, such as highball. So I think I get really excited about the fact that I get to learn so much about so many different consumers and what's driving them to make their purchase behavior.
are there any like tips that or advice you giving your team? Like, I mean, I can only imagine your like staff meetings, if you will, pardon the old reference, but like every category, each person on the team may be representing a different category. And how do you give them advice on how to think about that, I guess? I mean, obviously the consumer, like you said, starts at the beginning, but just wondering if there's common frameworks that you use.
No, there is. So we do talk a lot about the consumer and also the occasions that we're trying to win in. In some situations, the core consumer target may be the same between a hard seltzer and like a ready to drink cocktail. It's just the occasion is different when they choose it. So for instance, lighter, refreshing, low calorie, or are you going for something that's maybe a little bit higher ABV, more spirituous, more flavor? So I think what I always tell my team is one, for your specific group, for your category, know your consumer in and out and put them front and forward. At the same time, the reason why we have what you're calling like the staff meetings, which I've actually never used, but when you're doing that, the whole goal is to share, right? So they should actually in that moment sit down and say, okay, well, what is my counterpart doing that I can learn from? That may be a great cross-merchandising opportunity or a program we could go in together. But at the end of the day, what I tell my teams is they are the owner of their business. They know what the consumer wants. So if they're managing 5 brands within one space, what's the brand that's going to have the most impact right now? And that's the one they need to prioritize, because otherwise, you're right, we'd be way too busy.
Right. Yeah. Well, or potentially, I mean, if you don't have that consumer lens, you might be stepping on each other eventually.
Oh, all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, you mentioned one example of a category that's growing leaps and bounds, the ready to drink cocktails. But maybe let's talk about innovation in general and broad brush at Beyond Beer and within your organization. What examples can you share about like what type of innovation you're tracking, what's driving the innovation, et cetera?
Yeah. So I think, the way that we look at it and we look at it by category and then across the board. I mean, in the beginning, yes, we do kind of the business opportunity exercise, right? You look at what's growing, what are the sizes and flavors growing within that category or driving the growth. But then once we identify kind of those business opportunities, we then say, okay, well, what is happening with the consumer that's driving that growth? So for instance, flavored malt beverages can be many things. It can be the hard seltzers that are growing quite a bit. They can be traditional sweet FMB. They could also be complex FMB like a chelada. Actually, all 3 categories are growing, but all of them are growing for a different reason or a different occasion. So you have to kind of delve one step deeper and say, okay, well, who's driving that growth and how do we create the right brand and product for them? The traditional sweet FMB drinker doesn't really think about calories too much. They want the flavor. They want to enjoy that juiciness, like if you think about a lemonade. Whereas if you're thinking about a spiked seltzer drinker, they enjoy the flavor still, but for them, the stats are critical and they want refreshment more than they want flavor in some cases. So it's like, how do you create an innovation that really fits the needs and the wants of the consumer in the different moments?
I'm envisioning, I don't know if this is in any way accurate, but I'm envisioning this like huge thing on the wall that's like occasions throughout the day or, day and night, I should say, how that maps up to what your portfolio is is delivering against today. Potentially there's white spaces in that. And then you're constantly refreshing that with, the market stats on what's growing, what's declining, et cetera.
Oh, 100%. We definitely have it's like a vision board.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What we want to achieve. And then there's the vision board of everything happening and how that affects it. But yeah, we're constantly looking at, what's the big bet on innovation for the next year or next 2 years. And then we're also looking at, well, what do we want to be ready for in 3 or 4? So we're always looking at the short and the long-term goals.
How do you even begin to get ahead or stay ahead of those latest trends?
We try our best. I'm not going to say, we're perfect, but I will say the company's done an amazing job. And within the structure of the company, we have this ability to do large scale innovations, but then we have an innovation team called Apollo, and their whole goal is to really identify what I would call the future trends. And then we create kind of these small market tests to really understand, did this connect with the consumer? Or did we just completely create something that's just too new to the market and not ready yet? So in these ways, we're able to say, okay, here's the surefire innovation that we know will be big next year and will go big right away. And then there's the projects that we kind of almost like handhold and we test small and we really see if we can connect to the consumer. And then it's something that's almost ready to go when the consumer's ready for it, maybe a year or two later.
Got it. And so help me conceptualize what a small test looks like. Is it something batched in the lab? Is it?
So it's still something that we wouldn't do batching in a lab. It would still definitely be something we're brewing in the full tanks. But I think the difference is I might have a brand that is so specific that I only want to test it in Santa Monica, not Los Angeles, but literally Santa Monica. And I am going to go to the wholesaler that has that smaller region, and we're going to basically create a test and execute only in Santa Monica for 4 months and sell the product and activate the product and see what happens and learn.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, that's like the definition of a startup inside of a big company. How many of those things would you say you might end up doing over the course of a year? Maybe that's the wrong time horizon. I should not be thinking about, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I will tell you, and I'm very thankful to my innovation team who is so patient with us because we have so many crazy ideas. But so next year alone, I think we're doing about 4 or 5 tests of smaller things plus launching big things. So for me, it's that team just works around the clock to really just create the future for us. And I will say, having worked in the industry for a long time, our liquid development and brewing teams are some of the best that I've ever worked with. You can imagine something and they will create it.
Sounds like a dream come true.
It is. I will say the only tough part is when I do get the samples from the lab and I live in a 5th floor walk up. So my husband has to carry 20 to 30 bottles every week up the stairs. That's probably the only tough part about this job.
That's it. You can cancel the gym membership. You're because liquids, I don't know if it's like water. It's 8 pounds a gallon or something like that. I can only imagine.
It's definitely quite a bit. And he definitely gives me some side eye every time he brings over 4 or 5 boxes. So yeah, the company might owe him a little bit in the future.
Yeah. He didn't realize that he was getting a gym membership as a side benefit.
No. Yeah, he did not.
Cool. Well, having a background as you do in liquor, I think when I hear people talk about brands, liquor in particular, it's always this connotation that it's highly emotional marketing. How does one, I guess, do you agree with that? And then 2, how does that translate as you think about expanding marketing across all the various categories that you have? And does it translate all the way to the things that you would buy at a grocery shelf, if you will, in a ready to drink format?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. 100% on the emotional piece. I think when I think of spirits marketing and alcohol marketing, in a way, the most powerful brands are the ones that make you feel something. And that doesn't mean it's always kind of, aspirational and oh my God, this is so beautiful, but you react to it. I would say it's very similar for the space or any space. At the end of the day, the goal of all of these brands, whether it's ready to drink and in a can on the shelf to an amazing, product that we have, such as, Stella, that's in a bottle in the on-premise, to the spirits world. One of the things that you have to think about is, and our goal is, when a consumer walks to the bar, they're proud to order it. They're proud to tell their friends about it. And that is a common goal across the board. And in order for a brand to achieve that, it has to connect with you. And connection can be different, right? So for instance, with Bon Viv, our goal was we had a great liquid, but the consumer didn't feel very proud with, the packaging and some of the elements of the brand. So we did a lot of consumer work and we relaunched the brand in a way that felt much more premium, much more sophisticated, much more of what they would want to see from us. And what you'll see is now that we've launched, the amount of times that the brand is Instagrammed and we're tagged is doubling and tripling in scale all the time because consumers are now proud to show off this brand that they really enjoy and love. And that's on one side. When you also think about a brand that we have in the portfolio that I love, which is Natty. If you think about Natty, Natty is just pure comedy, joy, and happiness for their consumer target. They don't take themselves too serious. They're not trying to be this ultra health brand. They're not trying to be the most elevated premium brands, but they know their target and they know what their target wants. Like, I think I'm sure you've seen some of the ads that they're doing. It just it makes you smile every time you see it. And I think that's the most powerful thing you could do. And they talk about that with their consumers. Their consumers love the brand so much. They will send them videos, like user-generated content of they train their dog to bring them a Natty. They have parties with their friends and it's all about the Natty experience. That's what you want as a marketer, no matter what you're trying to sell.
And for those old fogies like myself, when you say Natty, you're talking Natty Light, right?
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, you couldn't talk about two very different brands between Bon Viv and Natty. I think they're by definition maybe on the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, but at the same time, to that point, they're both trying to achieve the same things: connect with their consumer and get a reaction.
Well, and sadly, I don't know, sadly is not the right word, but I could see myself drinking both, like at very different occasions, to your point. In the corporate crowd, I might bring a Bon Viv, and with my buddies from Concord, North Carolina, I might hang out with some Natty Light.
Well, there you go. See, we did the job. It's successful.
Exactly. I'm curious. I mean, you talked about Bon Viv. You talked about things you're doing, or the company overall is doing with Natty. Are there any favorite launches that you've had in recent history, or any of the examples from the portfolio you're like, you got to know about this if you haven't heard about this product? Just curious if anything like that you want to share.
So there's a couple of things I'm very proud of. I will say there's things coming up that I'm even more excited about, but maybe we'll talk another time soon.
Yeah. We'll have you back on. To talk about this. Yeah.
I'd love to. I think Social Club is something that was really interesting for me. It's a spiked seltzer that's basically inspired by cocktail flavors. So a sidecar, an old fashioned, and a citrus gimlet. And the whole goal of the brand was to try to almost like challenge the standards that have been created. Because we realized there was a consumer target that was 30 plus men, specifically multicultural, that just really didn't feel like the category was for them. And they also wanted more flavors and more sophistication from the segment. It goes back to that idea of proud to hold and proud to order. And they weren't excited about what was in the category. So we kind of tried to challenge it and really flip everything on its head with Social Club. And in order to launch it, we decided to really zero in on the target. So we really only speak about, the complexity of the flavors. We talk to the consumer about the entrepreneurial spirit, because for men in their 30s, and we look at a psychographic that's very much, that entrepreneur, the one who always wants to achieve more and has more. We talk about the guy who probably has an evening job at the end of his day job because his dream is to create an agency or do something that he can't do in his daily life. So our whole approach is to celebrate them in everything that we do. We do samplings at basically, we and startup spaces where possible nowadays, but we do a lot more in social. We created a club of basically creative freelancers who are looking for work in this time. And we brought them together into a virtual club and helped them find either work with us or with other brands in the company. So again, it's always thinking consumer first, but also thinking a little bit differently in a category that everyone kind of pigeonholed into one segment.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's interesting. Well, I need to check that out, frankly, because the one thing I miss from the spiked seltzers, because I've had them, is that the flavors, there's not enough flavor for me, maybe.
Yeah, the old fashioned is delicious.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. Okay.
There you go.
All right. Well, besides filling up my refrigerator in this conversation, how's the business changed, or the dynamics of the business changed through the pandemic?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. I would say it's probably changed 4 or 5 times, and it will continue to change. I think a lot of what we've talked about is to that point of consumer first. This isn't a moment that anyone could have planned for. I tell my team we've done 5 business plans this year. Last year's plan for this year, you'll use in a couple of years. But right now it's about really ensuring you're understanding how your consumer is feeling, and then how do you speak to them in those moments. So for instance, going back to Bon Viv or even Cutwater, we can talk about both brands had, these really interesting, amazing campaigns that we were about to shoot, but nobody wanted to see us in a bar or in a busy brunch location in a video because that wasn't relevant to what was happening in the world. So it was about how do you pivot? So for instance, in Bon Viv, we were working with our creative partners, Priyanka Chopra Jonas, and we literally over the weekend had calls to say, right now, the most important thing is to celebrate the women who are on the front line versus talking about ourselves. So we came up with a partnership where we basically did a program called Together Women Rise, and it was on her Instagram Live. And we basically would have our followers across the country submit videos and stories of the women in their life that they want to celebrate, who are doing amazing things in the middle of all of the challenges of the pandemic. And we would then give away some funding to these women. But more importantly, what they really cared about was the recognition. So each week we would recognize a few women. There was a couple of times where people just started crying because these women had such amazing stories. There was one woman in New York who was one of the last segments, and she's a frontline nurse, gave up being with her family because she had to quarantine every time she wasn't working. And it was a very hard life. And yet she was standing there on camera, smiling like crazy, just excited that someone was recognizing her. And I thought that was just an amazing thing. I mean, I definitely was like tearing up and texting my team, like, can we just send her a lifetime supply product, please? But I think you have to connect to what's happening. And we evolved after that. We went from that to doing brunch moments. And we realized that was a really important thing for our Bon Viv target. When you speak to women, a lot of times it's not about going out to a nightclub anymore on a Saturday. Your best moments with your friends is probably over brunch. And you can't really do that anymore in the world today. And what we want to do is kind of help bring some of that back. So we created brunch kits that you could order or send to a friend. It came with, Drizzly code for Bon Viv, but also as part of it, we were using local businesses to supply the brunch kits. So it also felt connect wherever you were. But our hope was just to make people happy or smile a little, because at the end of the day, that's what mattered.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. Not only how you had to pivot marketing and try to figure out new ways to reach your audience through your influencers, et cetera, to just the experiences that you can create. Because I can only imagine, I mean, sampling must be a traditionally huge component of your marketing mix that has become increasingly challenged to achieve that, given what's going on.
Yeah, no, I mean, for us, safety first, right? So yeah, there is no traditional sampling that we could do. What we've done quite a bit of is, one, obviously a lot more in digital in terms of e-commerce. How do we get the samples to our consumer in a safe way? Some other things we've done is, to the point of Social Club, we wouldn't do physical interactions with consumers, but as businesses or certain businesses were opening up, we would donate the product in locations that we knew, either with charities or other places where consumers could have the drink experience, but it wasn't a direct interaction. So we did quite a bit of like influencer kit send outs. And again, if someone DM'd us, we would figure out a way to help them try the product.
Nice. Well, it's amazing, just looking at like the scope of what you're doing, the innovation, the types of trends that you're on top of and trying to manage and stay in front of, I guess. Any tips for other marketers, like in fast moving categories, like, and trend driven categories, I would imagine, like yours? Anything you think, hey, marketers over in the CPG world, the traditional CPG world, they should be thinking they could use these couple of tools that I've used over here. Anything come to mind?
Yeah. I think if there's the biggest thing that I could say to anyone, I say it to my team quite a bit, don't be afraid to pivot. I know that, the teams, you put a lot of work in. Everyone puts a lot of work into these plans. But as the world evolves, if something doesn't feel right because it's not the same as it was even 2 weeks before, don't be afraid to stop and say, how do I change this? Or how do I make it better? Because the thing is, in that moment, you might actually come up with something even more brilliant. So I would just always say, keep an ear out, look for what's going on with the consumers, ask your friends or coworkers for input. But at the end of the day, yeah, don't worry about that slide that you presented that kind of you thought locked you in. You can always pivot.
Got it. Well, let's switch gears. One of the things we love to do on this show is to turn the table a little bit, take the corporate job off the table, and learn a little bit about you. And my favorite question, frankly, to ask is,
Uh-oh.
has there been an experience of your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
Yeah, I think, the best one that I can put forward is, so when I was graduating college, I had this moment of like, do I go to New York? I was in DC at the time. Do I go to New York and I had an internship lined up and kind of start my career path that way? I had an opportunity to go to LA. But as I was sitting there and thinking about it, one thing for me is I was born in Russia, in Moscow, but I had never really been. In fact, my father, who still lives there, makes fun of me for my very horrible American accent when I speak Russian. He kind of cringes when we talk on Zoom. And I decided in that moment that maybe this would be the opportunity for me to go back. So I, without any real job prospect or anything, I packed up my suitcases, kind of sold my stuff that I had, and I jumped on a plane and I went to Russia. And because I realized if I didn't do it then, who knows when I would do it. And it was a great experience. I actually got my first spirits job, which was at Pernod. I got to travel around Europe and just learn about different cultures. I got to recognize my own culture and understand, where did I come from and get closer to some of my family members. So that experience for me was immeasurable, but also it helps me with that now, is that if someone told me to jump on a plane tomorrow and move to Shanghai, I'd do it because I know that I could. So I think, anytime that there's a change in front of me, that experience helped me realize that I can face it. So that's a big one for me.
I love that. I love that experience and the example. What advice would you give your younger self if you're starting all over again?
Celebrate the wins more. I think especially if you're ambitious, which I think I've never met a marketer who isn't, to be quite honest. I think sometimes we're always striving for the next, or like almost looking at that KPI and what did we do with the data and did we succeed? And sometimes you forget to stop and say, look at what I've accomplished. I try to do that for my own team sometimes, of like, they're already dissecting what they did wrong so they can optimize it. And I literally make them stop and say, guys, you just launched a brand campaign that is getting hundreds of thousands, and actually in the future was millions of impressions over something you created over the weekend and wrote the copy yourself. Like, step back and recognize that you just did something amazing. And it was the Together Women Rise campaign. And you were basically the agency, the legal team, and the creative director at the same time. KPIs are great, but sometimes you got to celebrate just the amazing things that people accomplish that they almost forget to recognize.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And what a great example. I mean, that's a huge result for that team too.
Yeah. And I always remind them to be proud of those moments because, again, that's what counts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this next question is kind of silly, but frankly, I've used it to fill my pantry with different products and tools in the kitchen, to new books I should read. But I'm curious if there's been an impactful purchase of, say, $100 or less in the last 6 to 12 months that you've made.
So I would say, and this is not my first time purchasing it, I think we went a little overboard in the household. We are a Google Home household, and I've basically now turned every screen with Chrome into one control center, including also buying the Philips Hue lights for everything. So I am one of those people who says, hey, Google for everything. And I really love it. And it just makes life a little bit easier. Oh, now since I'm talking to you on a Chrome, Google is responding to me. So there we go.
I was just thinking that as soon as you said, hey, Google, everything was going to start talking to you back.
Yeah. So I would say that for me, I know it's not the most amazing, exciting thing. And I'm sorry, I would not suggest putting it in your fridge, but it does help with the ease of life. Even though when the power goes out, then you're kind of stuck. But otherwise.
No, I've got 2 Google Homes in my house and strategic locations, but I've been thinking about adding some other home automation stuff. So the lighting one in particular, there's one lamp in my house that I hate going over to turn on. Would much rather just yell out to turn it on. So.
Yeah, I tell you, it's a game changer. It makes you just a little more lazy than you really want to admit to, but it's a game changer.
Exactly. Well, a couple of last questions for you. There's 2 questions left. Curious, as marketers, we tend to be kind of observant as to what's going on around us. Are there any brands, companies, or causes that you are taking notice of, or you think other people should?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. I think there's many things that are happening in the world today. I think one of the biggest things that we all talk about this year, and you could not talk about, is obviously Black Lives Matter and the importance of the cause. And one of the things that we have done a lot is to say, how do you make impactful change and how do you address it? But at the same time, how do you do it in a way that's right for everyone in the teams? So from educating to supporting Black artists, Black authors, how do you support the business in a way that helps them shine? How do you make changes in your team for the future? So it's not something where there's an easy one-step solution, but it's something that for me is such an important part of who we are and what we should be doing differently and how we need to act together. That would be the one that I would say is bar none. It's so critical.
It's a great one. A great cause and effort to point out. And it ripples to your point that you're making. Like it really ripples through everything, the work environment, your personal life, and the choices you've made. Yeah, it's all encompassing. Well, the last question for you is, as a marketer, what do you feel like is the biggest opportunity or the largest threat that are facing marketers today?
I think it's one that honestly is something that's almost a constant, which is don't be afraid of change. I think you see marketers, you see agencies, you see businesses that want to stick to what was, and they refuse to open their eyes and say, okay, I need to evolve because maybe what they were doing was easy and they have a routine. I think that's the biggest threat to a marketer is if you kind of put your blinders on and say, I'm going to keep going the way I used to, because, you know, the world is changing. You have to look at what is the future normal? How do we continue to evolve with our consumers? Because if you don't evolve with the consumer, you're going to get left behind. They're not going to find you relevant anymore. You're not going to connect to them. So I think that's the biggest threat that you could have.
Well, Lana, it's been great having you on. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
I would love it. We'll have many other topics, I'm sure.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love to hear from listeners, and you can contact me at marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you'll also find complete show notes with links to anything we talk about on any episode. You can also search our archives. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.